Good morning. I'm Evelien and I'm the coordinator of the LIFE VAQUUMS project. I sit here with Christophe Stroobans, who is the team leader of the international projects on air quality of the Flanders Environment Agency. Today we will talk about the lessons learned of the LIFE VAQUUMS project and our recommendations on using low-cost air quality sensors in the future. So Christophe, how do you look back on the project?
Well, the project actually started off with a questionnaire and we asked our participants on what type of sensor they planned on using or were using, the drivers, the reasons why they were using those sensors, and the problems they encountered. So if you use that as a point of reference, there were some things we noticed. For instance, our sensor selection actually covered about 90% of the sensors that were used by respondents, both citizens, local policymakers, environmental experts, and a lot. And often the sensors that were not covered in our selection were actually on the more expensive side and were left out of scope for the VAQUUMS project, given our focus on use by citizens. So this is a good indication actually that our selection procedure was a valid approach. So I'm glad, because that was the starting point, obviously, for the project. Another thing we noticed is that many of the drivers actually involve using air quality sensors as a dialogue starter. So using them as an argument for local action, or just out of curiosity, or to learn kids about air quality. And that's something that we now take into account when we work with municipalities or when we advise citizens. So that's an interesting point where VAQUUMS brought us a step further. And then thirdly, something we noticed was that the problems that people encountered, the things that needed clarification, were interference, longevity, stability of the sensors, variance in a single sensor type, comparability to reference monitoring. Those were all rather unclear and a sort of roadblock for using air quality sensors. And we actually faced similar challenges in the early stage of the project. We had questions like, how do you compare across studies? How do you interpret tests that have lasted only for 2 weeks or maybe a month, when your goal is actually using the sensor for 2 years or longer? And I think we were able to provide some decent answers with the VAQUUMS project to those questions. Our test was quite unprecedented in nature. Each sensor was co-located in 5-fold with reference equipment for a whole year. So we've been able to thoroughly look at these questions, look at interference over time, look at calibration stability of the sensor signals over time. Also compare lab and field results, which is often something difficult to interpret in literature as well. And I'm quite glad actually with looking back at the project with this unique achievement and this one-of-a-kind benchmark that we were able to set with the VAQUUMS project.
So in hindsight, have there been any missed opportunities?
We used an approach that closely resembles a citizen's approach, in particular regarding sensor construction, sensor calibration. And what we've noticed in our test results is that, in particular for gas sensors, these devices are too much of a challenge for such an approach. They often require complex calibration algorithms, and it's not feasible in this approach. That's something we might do differently if we were able to start over. But it also actually inspired an idea we had, and an idea that was pitched to have an open challenge on sensor calibration, and that's something I would like to see us pick up in the future, in the afterlife of the project.
And how would such an open challenge look like?
That would probably use an online platform where we would try and involve citizens, anonymize the data, put it out there as an open data set, and challenge them to calibrate the data, for instance, based on the first month of measurements, and then validate it on the other 11 months, and that would provide an additional stimulus for citizens to get involved in the scientific side of air quality.
If the project would have had more time and resources, would you also have involved other stakeholders?
Yes, definitely. I'm pleased with how we were able to involve experts, both in the sensor selection and in an attempt we had at defining a sensor quality index. It also allowed us to build stronger cooperation with citizens and municipalities, and the project ultimately helped us build this hands-on roadmap for using air quality sensors in cities, for instance. But given more time or resources, as you asked, I would have enjoyed exploring further involvement of sensor developers, for instance. Right now it's limited to something we're able to do in part thanks to the project, a concept called open innovation monitoring stations, where we provide the opportunity to sensor developers to co-locate their equipment at a number of reference sites to improve their product. But I would have enjoyed delving further into that, perhaps challenging them also on the calibration part of the sensors, but it was out of scope in the project as it was now.
As is the case in most projects, not everything went according to plan. What would be the most important lessons learned?
Yeah, well, there's lessons learned on the scientific side. For instance, there were huge differences between sensors of a certain type, also between lab and field results. I mean, that's not really a surprise, but it's still amazing to see how big the differences can be. I think those elements have been highlighted as well in the videos we published on the sensor results. We also noticed that you always need a baseline calibration, not just for the gas sensors, which often require complex calibration, but also for the particulate matter sensors, for instance. Other than the scientific side, I'm also remembering many practical issues we had when trying to get the sensors up and running and having them operational.
And in what way was this extra challenging, this practical side?
Well, in our setup, which was a citizen-based approach, we used only low-cost components, so low-cost sensor devices, low-cost microcontrollers, low-cost communication units. And I mean, adding 3 types of low-cost device results in a lot of compromise, and it was really difficult to get them up and running. We actually expected to find a lot of sketches, for instance, for Arduino and such things online. We thought they're probably all there, but often we found 3 different sketches and none of them worked. So I think ultimately it's actually it's a positive story. We now have the sketches. We will provide them as part of the vacuums output, and we hope to save time with anyone who wants to work with these sensors in the future, and we hope they can use our sketches for that.
Now that the project is coming to an end, what key aspects should we keep in mind?
Well, yeah, there's a number of things. One thing I think we did quite well was standardizing the tests. So we've drafted testing protocols that we've aligned also with ongoing work in European normalization working groups. So there's probably still work to be done there, but I think our testing protocols can be used there to work towards a common standard and more intercomparability across sensor tests. And something else we really need to keep going after the project is just testing the new sensors, new devices that are released to the market, but also explore new ways of calibrating or maintaining calibration on gas sensors, for instance, because results there are still difficult to interpret at times, and they show that simple calibration procedures are not really very easy to apply to the gas sensors.
Almost every year we notice an increase in requests from cities, citizen scientists, but also from private sector regarding to air quality sensors and sensor networks. How can the LIFE VAQUUMS project help in addressing those requests?
Well, one thing I'm thinking of is, I mentioned before, it's the open innovation monitoring sites. They allow us to help the private sector in developing a better product. We open up a number of monitoring sites, and we help sensor developers apply our standardized testing protocol to these comparisons and help them improve their product, start a dialogue on calibration, algorithms, improvement of algorithms, and those things. So that's one thing. Looking at citizens, obviously we now have an expanded evidence base. So we can refer to the test results to provide them insight into which device to use, but also the sketches, as I mentioned before, for building the sensors and getting them up and running. They're very valuable for us. I mean, it's part of the experience we gained, and it allows us now to provide very much more concrete advice to both citizens and citizens.
Let's talk more specifically about these cities and municipalities. Do you see opportunities making their adoption of these new technologies more easy?
Yes, definitely. I think from our experience with the cities and the municipalities in the VAQUUMS project, we've learned that it's often difficult for them to comprehend the scientific side. I mean, there's a lot of science involved, very extensive reports on test results. So we should really try and translate our results into a comprehensible set of recommendations. And our train of thoughts currently is actually to do something in analogy to the open data charter that we have in Flanders, for instance. So this open data charter is a set of principles backed by a number of cities in Flanders, in which they state that they will go about publishing their data in an open way by certain governing principles, for instance. And we would like to do something similarly for air quality sensors. So work together with the cities to develop a charter with a limited set of governing principles on how to go about implementing citywide sensor networks, for instance.
So what principles could be in such a charter on air quality sensors?
Yeah, well, obviously there's an important link there to our roadmap, for instance. It's about tailoring your approach to the budget you have, to the current state of art, to the goals you're setting, and being as specific as you can in that as well. So it's much more easy to use sensors for a very, very specific research question and use case in a limited area of the city, for instance, than trying to use sensors to address any number of goals throughout the city. So tailor your approach and also develop through experimentation. Start small. Don't expect to roll out sensors across the city from the get-go. No, start small and build your sensor network through experimentation. Those are the main two principles coming from the roadmap, and then we would like to add, based on the lessons we learned and the things I've mentioned in this interview actually as well, encourage further sensor development through things like continued comparison with reference sites. As a city, if you want to purchase sensors, oblige the developers, the providers, perhaps through the tender, to compare them to a reference monitoring device in a standardized testing protocol. Use those sensors as much as you can alongside other methods to build best practices, because that's a thing we see that's missing. There's a lot of information on the scientific side, on the test results, and our expert workshop actually learned that there's not that much. It's not that easy to link the sensor quality or the performance and the test results to use cases. And we actually need more information, more best practices, more successful use cases. So whenever you can, try and include sensors in a monitoring campaign that also has reference methods, for instance. So those are the main principles we're thinking about. One other thing is don't do it alone. There's a lot of areas of expertise involved. There's data science, there's air quality, there's data communication, there's a smart city aspect, there's a citizen science aspect. So try and get all of those experts in those fields involved, and they will also help you specify the use cases.
I think this charter will be an added value as well for citizen scientists as for cities who want to start measuring air quality in a sensor network.
I wholeheartedly agree. The principle of the charter would be that it allows, it's a signal actually that the cities that are backing the charter won't rush into things. They won't start using air quality sensors without thinking it through, without applying certain governing principles that try to ensure at least a minimum level of quality and maybe a minimal chance of success. So it's really a statement of determination of the cities to implement an air quality sensor network purposefully and with a clear goal in mind and a clear impact in the field.
Thank you, Christophe, for this very interesting interview.
You're very much welcome, Evelien.